Hello, and thanks for joining us at the NB Media Co-op. I'm David Gordon Koch, and I'm here speaking to James Paddle. He's a medical student living in Moncton who has authored an open letter calling on Ottawa and the provincial government to launch an independent public health investigation into the potential causes of atypical neurological diseases in New Brunswick. James, first of all, thank you for joining us. What prompted you to launch this effort?
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Um, well, what really spurred all of this on was my personal experience seeing these patients firsthand in the office and talking to them, uh, hearing about their difficulties and the horrible things they've gone through, and hearing their families speak about this and seeing the real human impact of all of this. That's really what motivated me to write this letter. I felt almost like, after learning everything I've learned, that I didn't have a choice in a way, that I felt like something had to be done and I had to do my own very small part in this large story.
And James, as a medical student, you saw patients struggling with severe neurological symptoms, from what I gather, some of them as young as teenagers. And we were speaking before this call, there are just over 200 patients, you said, who have elevated levels of the herbicide glyphosate in their urine. Is that correct?
Yes, all of that is correct. The patients vary in age from teenagers all the way to patients in their 80s and 90s. And yes, what you stated is correct. We have now 200, well over 200 cases of this atypical neurodegenerative disease. And we have just over 200 who have confirmed elevated levels of glyphosate. And glyphosate, of course, is the most commonly used herbicide in Canada and in many other countries, and especially in the province of New Brunswick. Um, these patients also, not all of them, but many of them, also tested positive for very high amounts of other pesticides that are usually sprayed at the same time as glyphosate. And we also see something called a metabolite, which is a substance. When glyphosate is broken down in the body, it forms another substance called AMPA. And we also see that is very high. We're talking very high levels, very unnatural amount of levels in their urine, and the urine tests are how we measure all of this. Another thing that I think is important for everyone to know is there's another substance we test for. It's called pyruvate. It is it's a substance that's very important in a part of our cell that produces all of our cells that produce energy, which is all of our cells in our body. And if this pyruvate is very low, it indicates that there is something severely wrong with our cells and they can't produce enough energy. When that happens, very severe things can happen, and the organs that tend to be affected first is the brain because it requires so much energy. So we're seeing a lot of very peculiar and very strange results in their lab.
James, what kind of effects are these people suffering? The symptoms are outlined in the letter in some detail, but could you talk about some of the ones that you have seen firsthand?
Absolutely. Like I say in the letter, patients can present with very different presentations. So um, usually there are a few symptoms that are common that each patient will have, or we see in the majority of patients, such as brain fog, memory problems, concentration problems. Um, Also, people being lost, like they can't figure out where they are, they can't figure out how to get home, things like that. Now, patients, on top of those usual baseline symptoms, they'll have very severe symptoms such as muscle wasting. So patients lose a lot of weight, they lose all their muscles, they become very frail. People have muscle spasms where they can't really control their limbs. People can have full seizures where they lose consciousness and fall to the ground, and full seizures, which can last, you know, seizures can last for minutes at a time, and they can injure themselves in that period quite severely. A number of patients also present with symptoms like Alzheimer's. So, um, memory problems, concentration problems, long-term, short-term memory, and also forgetting how to do basic tasks. Um, and we're talking about people in their as young as in their 40s and 50s, not knowing how to clothe themselves, how to cook for themselves, how to write. And before all of this, many of these patients did not have any medical problems, were very healthy, and then all of a sudden these symptoms start, and then it progresses, and get leads to the point where they essentially become they need caregiving, unfortunately in some cases they die from this, and we still don't really understand uh, what's causing it or how they're dying, but they're dying from this.
But clearly devastating for the patients and their families. And you met these patients as a student of Dr. Alie Marrero, the neurologist who first identified a disease cluster, which the provincial government previously called a neurological syndrome of unknown cause. As you know, the provincial government later cast doubt on those findings, saying in February 2022 in a report that no cluster ever existed. Do you believe that a cluster or several clusters exist? And if so, where are they located?
Yes. Well, I can't speak to the government or public health findings. I'm speaking purely as a medical student who has seen the lab results and who I've spoken to these patients and their families, so I can't speak to that regarding the government. But what I will say from my personal experience working with Dr. Marrero and these patients is that we um, do see clusters, geographical clusters of these patients all across the province. There are some areas that are worse than others, and there are certain clusters that are really troubling in the amount of cases we're seeing. Oftentimes, it's in rural communities, towns, and villages, but it is important to note that we are seeing these in large urban areas in New Brunswick. We do have cases in Moncton, Dieppe, Riverview, in the Greater Moncton area. We do have a few cases in Fredericton. It is also important to note that Dr. Moreau, he does work for Horizon and Vitalité Health Networks, but the majority or um, a good amount of his patients come from the French health network and therefore from Francophone communities. So the population that he has as patients is biased in a way towards seeing Francophone parts of the province. So it's very possible that other neurologists and other doctors are seeing patients with this problem in Fredericton, St. John, in the western part of the province. So, but what I can speak to for his clusters that I'm not going to say he's seeing, but it's just fact that we're seeing these is, like I said, the Greater Moncton area. We also have a very significant cluster in Sackville and the Tantramar area. Also in Albert County, they're extending from Riverview through Hillsborough all the way down to Alma. Another important cluster is in the Petitcodiac and Salisbury area, kind of in the Sussex Valley area, closer to Moncton. As I said, we do also have cases, a couple cases in Fredericton. Um, Another cluster is St. Marie de Kent, Bouctouche, Saint Paul area. Miramichi, Newcastle, along the Miramichi River is also an important area for us. The entire Acadian Peninsula, including Bathurst. Shippagan is one of the main areas where we get referrals from, and extending all the way to Campbellton and then back through Kedgewick and Edmundston along the upper part of the St. John River. So, as you can clearly see, this is a provincial wide problem, and there are clusters in every corner of this province.
It really quite extensive. And the letter states that there are at least two hypotheses worth rigorous scientific investigation. And I think it is worth stressing that, as it says in the letter, these are hypotheses. The letter doesn't actually make any claims about whether these are the causal relationships, if I've understood correctly. But can you briefly understand what these hypotheses, what they are?
Yes, of course. And yes, as you said, there are two leading hypotheses at the moment. Um, and I feel it's important for the listeners of this and other viewers to know that these are not hypotheses that I have raised personally or Dr. Moreira or other professionals. These were the two leading hypotheses of the public health investigation prior to 2021. So we're not just kind of making this up out of thin air. This was already well established. Leading scientists in the field, such as Dr. Susan Murch and Dr. Neil Cashman of the University of British Columbia, who are experts in these environmental toxins and neurological problems, said so, that these are the two leading hypotheses. The two leading ideas at the moment, one is the herbicide glyphosate, and the other is a toxin, a neurotoxin called BMAA, and that is produced by blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. Concerning glyphosate, just a bit of context, glyphosate is the most widely used herbicide in Canada, and New Brunswick is the province with the highest proportion of its lands which are sprayed with glyphosate for various industrial activities. And so this glyphosate, it has been shown, and we do see it in the literature, that at high concentrations, it can be neurologically toxic. Um, it can cause directly the death of neurons, the cells in the brain and the spinal cord, the nervous system, and it can also induce a kind of self-suicide of these neurons. And it can also interrupt with the energy producing parts of the cell, such as the mitochondria. And we're also seeing that, as I said earlier, with the pyruvate. So we are seeing that there is something affecting the energy producing parts of the cells. So that's one leading hypothesis. And the other one, there is a link between the two, but I'll start with the second one before we get into the link, is neurotoxin BMAA produced by blue-green algae. And I'm sure as many New Brunswickers will know that unfortunately blue-green algae blooms are quite a common annual occurrence these days. It seems like almost every year we have blooms. If I'm not mistaken, I believe there were already blooms in the Irish Town Reservoir, St. John River, and I believe at one of the beaches along the southeastern coast just this year.
And
And
I think typically, just to jump in there, it's said that that these blue-green algae blooms are linked to warmer conditions connected to
yeah,
climate change. But as you say,
absolutely.
there's also a link to glyphosate. But go on.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another challenge we're going to have as the climate changes and with global warming, with warmer conditions, it favors these blooms of blue-green algae. So definitely it's something that in all likelihood will become a more a significant challenge for everyone. So yes, this BMAA toxin, it's produced by blue-green algae, and an excellent study was conducted at the University of Miami by, I believe his name was Dr. David Davis. And he found on the Gulf Coast of Florida, which has had large blue-green algae blooms similar to here in New Brunswick, he conducted autopsies on 6 Floridians who had very strange neurological diseases that mimicked Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And he actually found BMAA in their brains, in a specific part of their brain, which is located near the nose. So, and he concluded that BMAA can travel through the air and can be It can, when you breathe the air, it can be breathed into your nose, and it can attach itself and it can work its way into your brain. A lot of research is still needed on how that all works, and um, um,
Right.
to just know more about that situation.
And you're calling for more research in this open letter, which we're going to link on our website, nbmediacoop.org. And just briefly, this connection between glyphosate and blue-green algae is discussed in the letter. Can you talk about that briefly?
Yes, of course. So in glyphosate, there is phosphorus. And when glyphosate works its way through, like, it's usually sprayed on trees or in agriculture, when it works its way through the environment into the water source, and it works its way into rivers and lakes and bodies of water, the phosphorus stimulates the blue-green algae to produce more of its neurotoxin BMAA. So as of right now, um, it's possible that glyphosate directly is the cause. It's possible that BMAA is directly the cause, and it could also be a combination of both. So, and as I said, and as you have mentioned, we are not concluding on the cause because we do not have the sufficient evidence to come to a proper scientific conclusion. What we are calling for is a public health investigation focusing on the environment to really gather the information and the data necessary to find the answers for these patients.
And of course, uh, it's worth noting that glyphosate it's a controversial topic. It has its defenders, and it is approved for use in Canada by health authorities. And you do acknowledge this in your letter. Reading from it here, it states glyphosate is the most common chemical used to kill weeds in forestry and agriculture in Canada. Health Canada has deemed that the appropriate use of glyphosate in accordance with label instructions does not pose a significant risk to public health. But you note that that doesn't mean that large amounts are safe. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Just firstly, though, it's surprising that very few studies have been conducted on the safety of glyphosate, considering it's the most widely used herbicide in the world. Um, so just to start off that, we have very little information about its safety. Concerning the amounts, yes, it's very important to make this distinction. It is true that we consume glyphosate in our diets through grains, fruits, vegetables. When glyphosate is sprayed on crops, we do ingest a small amount of it. No one is disputing that. What we are disputing is the safety of large amounts of glyphosate. The amounts of glyphosate we're seeing in our patients is not normal. It's extremely high. So just because a small amount is not harmful does not mean that a large amount is safe. It could be, in fact, dangerous. Of course, we need more research to be good, to be certain. I make the example with lead or other heavy metals. There is a normal amount, a very small amount of lead that is normal in the general public's blood. Lead is a natural occurring element, and it can be in our bodies in very small amounts. Now, just because we have a small amount in our blood that is technically safe and it doesn't cause any problems, it doesn't mean that lead is not poisonous and not dangerous. It most certainly is. It's very dangerous. It can cause neurological problems and developmental problems in children, which can be very severe. So I think it's very important to realize that, yes, we do have a certain amount of glyphosate in our bodies in the general public, but it does not mean that in high concentrations, that, like what we're seeing in our patients, that it's safe.
And the letter has been signed by medical students, several academics, an environmental group, Stop Spraying New Brunswick, along with several dozen concerned citizens. The NB Media Co-op has reached out to the provincial government and to the federal government for comment on this story. As you know, New Brunswick's Health Minister Bruce Fitch previously stated that further investigation into the what is sometimes called the mystery illness stopped because the Public Health Agency of Canada agreed with the findings that were found here in the province of New Brunswick. The federal government, for its part, said, this is a quote, acknowledged the investigation's finding that this cluster does not represent a neurological syndrome of unknown cause. Any response to those comments briefly?
Yes. Well, I won't necessarily directly comment on the minister or or the government, but what I will say in terms of the science is that the research, the committee that was set up to look into this, um, I would I would say that on a scientific, purely scientific basis, um, more research is needed, and that more information has come to light since their investigation ended, and also the amount of new cases and the speed at which we're seeing them since that investigation was stopped, I believe merits a reopening of the investigation with with a group of many experts in different fields, toxicology, neurology, oncology. We need experts in a lot of different things, environmental health, to really get to the bottom of this.
Well, just wrapping up here, anything else to add briefly, James?
Um, well, I would just reiterate that the number of cases is growing quickly. Um, we have now over 200 cases with confirmed extremely elevated amounts of glyphosate and other pesticides in their bodies. We also have many more patients that we're waiting to get their results. So the thing is we don't know how this is happening, and it's affecting everyone across the province. And it could be, we don't know who will become sick next. So I think it's in everyone's interest in New Brunswick and frankly across the country to recognize this as a a a tragic situation, and really put the emphasis and focus on this severe public health problem, and dedicate the necessary resources and personnel to really find the cause, um, and get the answers, get the information, and get the answers necessary to give satisfactory answers to the patients and their families who've been wanting answers for over 8 years now. I think as a medical student and as a future doctor, and other doctors who have been working on this, I think it's our duty to provide answers for our patients and to at least explain to them what is happening to them. They've been through terrible experiences, and I think that we owe it to them to find the answers.
Well, we'll be following up on this story as well at the NB Media Co-op. And thank you for speaking to me today, James. That's James Paddle, medical student living in Moncton and author of an open letter. And viewers can find that letter in an article with more details on this story on our website, nbmediacoop.org. I'm David Gordon Koch. Thanks for joining us today.